The hero of our story suddenly found himself in a strange world where he was tasked with saving it. After spending decades battling monsters, he finally managed to complete his mission and received a great reward to bring back to his own world. However, upon his return, he was shocked to find his world had changed, and all the treasures and weapons he had collected had vanished, shattering his plan to retire and live in peace. Relying on the strength and experience he gained in the other world, will our hero be able to live the life he has always dreamed of? This is what we will uncover in today's story. Our story begins in a place completely devastated by the terrifying zombie army, where the zombies continue to destroy everything in their path. The scene then shifts to the hero of the Human Alliance, Ji-hyuk, known as the Demon of Daros, proudly declaring that all his efforts have not been in vain. A man standing next to him, visibly nervous, asks why he always stays by his side in every battle they face. This man is the great mage Tyros, who summoned Ji-hyuk. Ji-hyuk replies that, since Tyros was the one who summoned him, it is his duty at least to stand by him and watch how he fights. Tyros responds, saying he has seen him fight many times, and that it is enough. Hearing these words, Ji-hyuk becomes agitated and tells Tyros that he should feel responsible, at least because he was the one who summoned him. Tyros appears regretful, but Ji-hyuk continues, asking what he means by saying he has seen enough. He then states that he was at home sleeping when he suddenly found himself in a war he knew nothing about, fighting for 30 years without a chance to understand what was happening or why the war existed. Ji-hyuk adds that, despite everything, the enemies and their followers are not much different, and the only reason he helps is that it is the fastest way to return to Earth. He then asks Tyros to stop talking and finish the matter quickly. After that, he looks at his zombie soldiers and is shocked by what he sees. It becomes apparent that the Demon King was easily defeated by Ji-hyuk's zombie army. Tyros is surprised to see Ji-hyuk looking deeply disappointed by how quickly the battle ended. The greater shock comes when Ji-hyuk announces that he had prepared 4 secret weapons for this battle and, had he known it would end so quickly, he would have used them from the beginning. Ji-hyuk then smiles and tells Tyros that the Demon King has been defeated and that it is time for him to fulfill his promise. The scene shifts to Ji-hyuk carrying a large amount of gold, looking delighted. Gazing at the mountain of gold before him, he remarks that this wealth will allow him to live happily upon returning to Earth and achieve all he desires. Tyros calls out to him, informing him that all preparations have been successfully completed and that he can return to Earth if he wishes. He then asks if Ji-hyuk will leave now or stay with them for some time. Ji-hyuk replies that there is no reason to delay, adding that if he stays, they would not enjoy his presence. Tyros tries to respond, saying that is not true, but Ji-hyuk interrupts him, telling him to stop with the pleasantries as he wants to return to Earth immediately. Tyros concedes, saying he will do as Ji-hyuk wishes. Afterward, Tyros shows him a stone, explaining that this stone has the power to alter the laws of causality, and is the reason Ji-hyuk has remained in this world for the past 30 years. It is also the reason he has not aged or shown any signs of time's passage. Ji-hyuk asks if breaking the stone will restore the laws of causality and send him back to the same moment he was taken from his world. Tyros confirms this, adding that the stone has reached its limit, and that even a minor impact would be enough to destroy it. He warns Ji-hyuk against resisting the natural laws when they are restored. Ji-hyuk quickly takes the stone, paying little attention to the final warning. Before breaking it, he tells Tyros that he never enjoyed knowing them, and hopes never to see them again. Then, he shatters the stone. Ji-hyuk opens his eyes to find that the place around him has completely changed. He quickly realizes he has returned to Earth, specifically to his home. Excitedly, he declares that now he can do whatever he wants. The first thing he does is grab a bag of chips to snack on while pondering what he should buy later. He adds that money or time are the least of his worries now, as he has plenty of both. Afterward, he opens his magic portal to check the items he brought with him from the other world. However, his expression changes abruptly as he notices the portal is empty. He sticks his head fully into the portal to ensure he isn't imagining things, but he finds none of the gold and riches he had been gathering for the past 30 years. He also can't find his zombie army, his weapons, or the rewards he recently received from Tyros. Overwhelmed with anxiety, he feels like he's losing his mind over the disappearance of everything he once possessed. He begins to recall the events he experienced when he first arrived in the other world, known as Siron, remembering how confused he was when he initially got there. He recalls feeling disoriented as Tyros stood beside him, explaining that he was now in the world of Siron. Despite the explanation, Ji-hyuk struggled to grasp what was happening and repeatedly asked about the place he found himself in. Internally, he wondered how he had endured everything, especially during his early days of learning in that world, when the books he studied made no sense to him. One time, while he was in the library with Tyros, the latter misheard what Ji-hyuk had said and asked him to repeat himself. Frustrated, Ji-hyuk threw a book at Tyros, and angrily complained that he couldn't understand why he was being forced to read such useless books. He also remembers the battles he fought with his zombie army, and the hardships he faced during that long, tedious time in Seiron, to the point where he stopped keeping track of the years. Returning to the present, Ji-hyuk appears deeply frustrated, lamenting that he had been waiting for the day he could return to Earth, only to be betrayed by Tyros and the inhabitants of Seiron, who had stolen all his possessions. Enraged, he curses Tyros, declaring that he needs his treasures and rewards to retire and live peacefully. In the midst of his despair, something unusual breaks his train of thought. He senses magical waves on Earth. Suddenly, a rift forms in the air, caused by this magical energy. Ji-hyuk quickly rushes toward the source of the energy, finding people fleeing the area in panic. As he gets closer, he is shocked by what he sees. Dragons are soaring through the sky, and he wonders why such creatures are appearing on Earth. He suspects Tyros is behind this, thinking that Tyros didn't actually send him back to Earth but to an entirely different place. Deciding he needs to leave the area quickly before things get worse, Ji-hyuk notices a young boy who has fallen to the ground while trying to escape. A dragon is chasing the boy and is about to devour him. The boy, having looked back and seen the dragon, is paralyzed with fear and can do nothing but cry. Ji-hyuk mutters that he hadn't intended to intervene, but he finds himself unable to stand idly by. He decides these monsters must pay for interfering with his possessions. Before he can use his abilities, he hears a voice from behind telling him to leave the area immediately. He turns to see the person who spoke, watching as they effortlessly slice the dragon that was about to eat the boy in half. Ji-hyuk looks at the boy and asks if he is all right, urging him to quickly find a safe place to hide. All of this unfolds in front of Ji-hyuk, who remains unable to comprehend what is happening around him. Shortly after, an armed emergency response team arrives, with their leader commanding them to suppress the monsters quickly. Ji-hyuk turns toward them and notices that some are wielding swords, others are using bows and arrows, and a few are equipped with shields. Ji-hyuk is utterly shocked, wondering how people on Earth could possess such extraordinary powers. He adds that their abilities are reminiscent of the knights on the planet Seiron. One of the soldiers notices Ji-hyuk and uses magic to warn him of a nearby danger, asking him to stay alert. However, Ji-hyuk remains still, showing no reaction even as a magical projectile narrowly misses his head. A massive explosion occurs behind him as a result of the spell, but Ji-hyuk continues to laugh, seemingly unbothered by the raging battle. The first person that comes to his mind is Tyros, and he begins cursing him after realizing he hasn't actually returned to Earth. The scene then shifts to Ji-hyuk sitting in his home, facing his computer. Reflecting on recent events, he states that, after an entire day of thorough research, he has confirmed that this is indeed the Earth he knows. The only difference is the presence of gates, monsters, and individuals with unique abilities known as awakened. He recalls that before leaving Seiron, Tyros had mentioned something about causality, but he decides that it is irrelevant now. What troubles him the most is that his plan for a peaceful retirement with abundant wealth has completely failed. Frustrated, he remarks that someone his age shouldn't have to worry about securing a living. He adds that, while joining the Awakened Association and entering gates to hunt monsters could easily earn him money, he doesn't want to do it because of his extreme laziness, a result of his actual age being 60 years. He considers an alternative approach, using magic, and thinks that if things get difficult, he can rely on his skeleton soldiers to complete tasks. However, the only concern is how people might react to the zombies. Nevertheless, he decides to visit the Hunter Association to try his luck. Upon arriving at the association, people seem bewildered by what they see, as it is their first time encountering something like this. Still, everything proceeds without any issues. Someone asks him if he can control the skeletons, and Ji-hyuk feels relieved, thinking to himself that the best part is that they have classified the skeletons as summoned monsters. This means he won't need to explain much to them. People begin asking him numerous questions, such as the maximum number of skeletons he can summon at once, whether he can unsummon them, and the combat abilities and skills of the skeletons. Feeling overwhelmed by the barrage of questions, Ji-hyuk asks them to calm down so he can answer everything at a steady pace. He starts by saying that he is unsure of the maximum number of skeletons he can summon, as he can later store them within his portal. They ask if he can store other items in the portal, to which he responds that he can only store skeletons. They seem skeptical of his claim and test it by throwing various items into the portal, but none of them enter. Finally, Ji-hyuk tells them that he has no reason to lie to them. In his mind, Ji-hyuk continues thinking that the only items allowed through the portal are those explicitly permitted, allowing them to pass. The others ultimately believe Ji-hyuk's explanation, and they apologize, explaining that they acted that way due to the many people who try to deceive them. He reassures them that it's not a problem, and then announces that it's time to test their combat skills. One of them picks up a bat, and declares that he won't go easy on them. At that moment, a sinister aura emerges from the skeleton before it attacks the man. However, Ji-hyuk fully suppresses the aura without anyone noticing. and the man easily destroys the skeleton with a single strike. The man looks confused and admits that the skeleton was far weaker than he had anticipated, then informs Ji-hyuk that the testing is complete and that they will now move to their private room to discuss and determine his rank. After they leave, Ji-hyuk wonders whether he should listen to their discussion or not, but he can't resist his curiosity and eavesdrops. They talk about how his skill is new and intriguing, but criticize its unclear nature. They also note that his skeleton's control capabilities are very weak, and their combat abilities are far from impressive. The last part he hears, and which frustrates him greatly, is their conclusion that an F-class card would be the most suitable for him due to his ambiguous abilities, and they all agree. Later, Ji-hyuk receives his F-class card, but he doesn't care much about the ranking. He puts the card in his pocket and decides that it's time to earn some money. He heads to the dungeon where he plans to hunt monsters, distinguishing himself from ordinary necromancers. While most necromancers use their mana to fuel and control dead creatures, human mental strength and mana have limits, which restricts the number of summoned creatures they can maintain. One of his skeletons is surrounded by a golem, which seems nervous and unable to act. The golem then spits a green liquid from its mouth, striking one of the skeletons. The liquid melts the skeleton's head, leaving Ji-hyuk astonished. He quickly summons several magic circles and issues specific commands. If the green liquid is emitted again, the skeletons should execute dodge maneuver 6. If that fails, proceed to maneuver 7, then maneuver 8. If none are feasible, activate defense protocol 11, and if that fails, proceed with attack strategy 17, as a last resort. This is the system he devised. This system relies on pre-written algorithms embedded into the undead, enabling them to act autonomously based on certain commands in specific situations, which simplifies the process and eliminates the need for direct control. As a result, there is no limit to the number of summoned creatures he can maintain, making things much more efficient. Ji-hyuk comments, appearing exhausted, that this method is very similar to programming computers, something he never imagined he'd have to do again. He notes that, at first, there were numerous errors due to conflicting commands, but things improved over time. He recalls that he had a perfected version of this system after 30 years of adjustments on the planet Saron, and remarks that if he still had it now, he wouldn't need to start from scratch. He amends his statement, saying that if he had the system, he would have enough money to retire quickly, all thanks to that scoundrel Tyros. Snapping out of his thoughts, he tells himself that complaining won't solve anything, and that he needs to create a basic version of his system and work on improving it gradually. He then checks his phone and realizes he has spent 4 hours hunting, deciding that it's enough for the day. When Ji-hyuk exits the portal, he is greeted by a large crowd of people waiting outside, all of whom seem astonished by what they see. Ji-hyuk walks out accompanied by his army of skeletons, yet the people comment on how weak the skeletons appear despite their numbers, noting that this is why he was ranked as an F-class. Ji-hyuk meets a man who has been waiting for him and appears extremely pleased. The man tells him that he managed to hunt a large number of monsters today as well. The man begins calculating Ji-hyuk's reward, but Ji-hyuk insists there's no need for precise calculations since he didn't personally hunt the monsters and is fine with an approximate amount. Nonetheless, the man ignores Ji-hyuk's comment and calculates the reward accurately before transferring it to his account. After receiving the money, Ji-hyuk looks at his phone and remarks to himself that he still has a long way to go before saving enough for retirement. The man thanks Ji-hyuk for his cooperation and assures him that he will always be there to offer his services. Ji-hyuk reflects on his current situation, saying he doesn't feel too troubled by it because earning a high ranking would attract attention, something he wants to avoid. He decides to endure his current status temporarily until he can improve his system, at which point, everything will be fine. He overhears people talking about him, commenting on how lucky he is to summon so many monsters, eliminating the need for porters to transport his loot. They note that he saves money otherwise spent on hiring porters, which costs 30,000 won per hour, and that he makes significant profits even with the low-level gate due to the large number of corpses he collects daily. One of them wonders how many corpses he can collect in a day, while another suggests inviting Ji-hyuk to join their team. The other person responds by saying that summoners typically don't work well in teams because collaborating with them is incredibly challenging. While their conversation continues, they hear someone calling out to them. Turning around, they realize it's Ji-hyuk, leaving them feeling incredibly nervous. One of them apologizes to Ji-hyuk, explaining that they were just chatting and expressing regret over his friend's inappropriate comments. Ji-hyuk smiles at them and assures them it's no big deal, then asks if they found a porter yet. Surprised by his question, they tell him they were just about to look for one. Ji-hyuk smiles again and suggests they try out a new porter with a special offer, free service for the first time. The two immediately agree and join Ji-hyuk in the dungeon to hunt monsters. Each of them uses their skills in hunting, and after some time they gather a significant number of monsters. They ask Ji Hyuk about the idea he mentioned earlier. Ji Hyuk then reveals a skeleton in the form of a horse equipped with storage space that can be used for various items. He explains that the horse still requires many adjustments and elaborates that the project's goal is to transform his skeletons into porters. He adds that the best feature of these skeletons is their environmental friendliness. They don't need fuel to operate and never get tired. Ji Hyuk further explains that the skeletons can be rented for 30,000 won per hour, and each skeleton can do the work of 3 human laborers. The hunters contemplate the offer, saying it's highly tempting since it costs only a third of what they would pay for 3 human workers. In the end, they agree to the offer. Ji Hyuk is thrilled when the hunters promise to spread the word about his service and offers them a special discount. They jokingly comment that his approach is more like that of a businessman than an ordinary awakened. Ji Hyuk feels delighted and remarks that working as a businessman isn't that difficult. The story shifts to another scene showing Ji Hyuk sitting in a shaded area, while long lines of awakened wait to rent skeletons from him. He smiles, remarking that making money without effort is always the best thing. In the line, there is a girl managing the operation and handing out skeletons to the awakened. To understand who this girl is and how she got there, we need to go back in time. One day, while exploring the dungeon to complete his system and enhance the idea of skeletal porters, Ji Hyuk grew bored and exhausted from working in the dungeons. He declared to himself that once his system was finished, he would never enter dungeons again. As he walked, he spotted a body lying in the distance. Sensing that getting closer might lead to trouble, he assumed the person had been dead for a long time. Deciding to move on, he ignored the body and muttered to himself that intervening would only be tiresome. He commanded his skeletons to avoid paying any attention to it. However, the skeletons seemed to pity the body so much that none of them followed Ji Hyuk. Realizing this, Ji Hyuk noticed that his skeletons were behaving just like him, showing sympathy toward the body. Left with no choice, he summoned the body as a zombie, reasoning to himself that he needed someone for part-time work anyway, and could have this body stand in line for sales to spare himself the hassle. He wondered what had happened to cause the girl to die in such a manner. Delving into her memories, Ji Hyuk saw that her family depended on her heavily. Her brother had urged her not to overexert herself, offering to take on a part-time job if necessary. She had replied that he was a student and shouldn't work yet, asking him not to worry since she was an awakened after all. Ji Hyuk exited her memories and informed her that all the wages she earned with him from now on would go to her family. He reassured her that this was better than staying dead and leaving her family to suffer financially. He returned to her memories once more to discover how she had ended up dying in that place. He learned that she had suffered a severe injury and had asked one of the awakened with her for help, but he refused and blamed her, saying it was the result of her reckless actions. When another awakened asked what they should do about her, he responded that the answer was obvious. He coldly stated that they should leave her there and move on. As the 2 awakened began to leave, Saya pleaded with them to save her, but they chose to abandon her to die in that place. Returning to the present, Ji Hyuk had already summoned her and remarked that her story was tragic, as she had been betrayed by cruel people. He advised her to take better care of herself in the future. He called her by name, declaring that she had been an F-class awakened and was now his assistant. However, she seemed unable to comprehend any of what he had just said. And so, we learned how Saya ended up working with Ji Hyuk. Ji Hyuk commented that everything was going great, and that Sia's fast work was earning him tremendous profits with no effort. The only issue he faced now was how to deal with the people who had caused Sia's death in the dungeon. Ji Hyuk thought about it for a moment and decided that intervening would be too troublesome, so he chose to ignore it for the time being. Later, he noticed that not all of his skeletons had entered the dungeon. This led him to deduce that the dungeon had a limit on the number of entrants. He wondered if it might be better to leave the place to Saya and move elsewhere, but he decided not to rush and chose to observe the situation carefully before making any decisions. He then got up to go to the bathroom. The scene shifts to 3 porters standing far from Ji Hyuk's area, looking visibly frustrated. A girl among them commented that everyone was now turning to those skeletons and no longer hiring real porters. The young man next to her suggested they could head to another gate. However, Chan-Su replied that they couldn't do that because this was the closest gate to them. An idea occurred to him. He would make a request to Ji Hyuk, noting that Ji Hyuk didn't seem like a bad person. The girl asked what kind of request he had in mind, to which he replied that he wanted to ask Ji Hyuk to reduce the number of supplies he was selling, and perhaps lower the quantities slightly. She asked if he thought the plan would work, while the other young man interjected, suggesting that moving to another location would solve their problem. He continued, pointing out that even after renting all his skeletons to the awakened in the area, Ji Hyuk still had a surplus of skeletons. This surplus meant he might soon expand to nearby gates. Chan-Su responds to them saying, "How long are we going to keep retreating like this?" At that moment, he overhears other people talking about Ji Hyuk. Kim Young tells his friend that his comments have become completely irrational. He asks his friend if the vendor over there is the F-class awakened who uses all his minions as porters, mocking him by saying he can't imagine how weak someone must be to make money in such a manner. His friend warns him, saying it's better not to provoke any awakened right now. Kim Young questions why and adds that he isn't foolish enough to cause trouble with another awakened, no matter how weak they are. However, he smirks slyly and reveals that he didn't come to this place without having some backing. He discloses that the awakened supporting him have agreed to intervene and offers to help Chan-Su and his group, saying all they need to do is join him and flood the area. The girl in the group comments that the offer isn't bad, but points out that if they want to compete with Ji-hyuk, they'll have to work for 10,000 won an hour, so hunters can afford to hire them. She adds that with such a low wage, she'd rather take on any other job. She concludes by saying that Ji-hyuk was the one who broke the ethics of their work first. The young man responds, saying that while her point is valid, there might still be a chance to resolve the issue through a discussion with Ji-hyuk. However, his friend counters by saying that while his idea might be reasonable, there's no guarantee it will work. He apologizes and explains that they'll go with Kim Young to try his suggestion. He adds that they have no other choice, as all their friends will also be joining Kim Young. He assures him that if he ever changes his mind, all he has to do is find them, and they'll welcome him back because he's strong, after all. Sadness appears on Chan-Su's face as he remarks that what's happening isn't right at all. Breathing heavily, unsure of what to do, Chan-Su mutters that Ji-hyuk could be in significant danger and wonders if he should send him a message to warn him about what's coming. Suddenly he hears Ji-hyuk's voice behind him, startling him greatly. Ji-hyuk smiles at Chan-Su and tells him he admires him. Chan-Su, now nervous, asks if Ji-hyuk heard everything he said. His anxiety grows as Ji-hyuk confirms that he did hear it all. Ji-hyuk then continues, saying that what he hates most is when people try to set traps for him. With a sly smile, he adds that he was planning to teach everyone a harsh lesson, but has changed his mind. Pointing to Chan-Su, Ji-hyuk comments that he liked the way he spoke earlier, which made him think about the situation for a while. He then offers Chan-Su a part-time job, explaining that he's been considering expanding his business, and if Chan-Su agrees, he'll pay him a good wage. Overjoyed, Chan-Su enthusiastically tells Ji-hyuk that if they do this, the other porters will return to work. Laughing, Ji-hyuk responds that he'd been thinking about this for some time, and that it's the best idea he's had so far. However, Ji-hyuk's expression suddenly changes, and he tells Chan-Su that when he mentioned the other porters, he certainly didn't mean those who joined Kim Young to cause trouble. Sweat drips from Chan-Su as he realizes Ji-hyuk is entirely correct. Chan-Su tries to defend his friends, explaining that their actions were due to their recent struggles at work and insisting that they aren't bad people. He adds that if Ji-hyuk speaks to them and offers them the same deal he offered him, he's sure they'll agree. Taking a deep breath, Ji-hyuk says that he usually doesn't let those who betray him go unpunished, but understands the feeling of financial desperation. For that reason, he's willing to give them one chance, thanks to Chan-Su. The condition, however, is that Chan-Su must keep this offer a secret while trying to convince them. Ji-hyuk adds that if they trust him enough to come back, it will prove they still have some loyalty, which is what matters most to him. He then asks Chan-Su if he thinks he can persuade them. With no other choice, Chan-Su agrees to try to convince them. The scene shifts to Kim Young, who has gathered a large group of people and meets with the awakened he had agreed to work with. He informs him that everything is now ready. One of Chan-Su's friends feels disheartened when he sees the support team Kim Young mentioned, which turns out to be an E-class awakened named Kim Jung. Kim Jung greets everyone present, but they all seem uneasy. They reassure themselves that an E-class team should be more than enough to handle an F-class awakened. Kim Jung begins by addressing the group, saying they are all gathered here to deal with Ji-hyuk. He adds that he had tried Ji-hyuk's skeletons and found them incredibly useful and cheap, to the point where they prevent the awakened from considering hiring human porters. Placing a hand on Kim Young's shoulder, Kim Jung remarks that things are different for him since Kim Young worked as a porter under his employ and provided him with a steady income. Therefore, Kim Jung sees it as his duty to intervene to protect the rights of porters. The porters agree with him, expressing their desire to make enough money to survive. Kim Jung smiles and asks them to listen closely to his plan for today. His strategy involves monitoring Ji-hyuk as he leaves for his home and timing a protest so that Ji-hyuk has no chance to escape. The plan is to provoke Ji-hyuk until he begins summoning his skeletons to fight, at which point Kim Jung and his team will step in to handle him. The porters think over the plan and note that if it plays out this way, it will appear as though Ji-hyuk attacked them first, leaving them blameless and making it seem like they didn't do anything wrong. However, Kim Jung then states that they will need to pay him for his involvement in their issue, raising his commission from 15% to 25%. Upon hearing this, Kim Jung protests, asking Kim Jung to reconsider since this wasn't part of their original agreement. Kim Jung retorts, "Did you think I'd help you deal with another awakened for free?" Kim Young tries to respond, but Kim Jung interrupts, warning him that he could just let Ji Hyuk take over all his work since Kim Young isn't willing to part with 25% of his earnings. He adds that he can always find a new job elsewhere. Kim Jung tells him the choice is his and that he won't force him into anything. Left with no alternative, Kim Young reluctantly agrees to the deal. Hearing his agreement, Kim Jung expresses his delight and commends Kim Young for his sense of responsibility, adding that they'll meet at the designated time. After Kim Jung and his team leave, the porters surround Kim Young, voicing their frustration. They ask him how he could agree to such terms, especially since paying 25% on top of taxes would leave them with barely anything to live on. Kim Young angrily responds, blaming everything on Ji Hyuk. He asserts that if Ji Hyuk hadn't opened his business, their income wouldn't have decreased so much, and they wouldn't have had to seek help from these troublesome awakened. He tells them that if they don't like what's happening, they're free to leave or go elsewhere. However, he's confident that if they do, they won't last long. Before any decision is made, Chan-Soo arrives. He asks them to calm down, insisting that the problem can be resolved without resorting to the measures they're planning. However, Kim Young yells at him, demanding to know why he has returned. Chan-Soo explains that he saw them from afar and came to tell them that he spoke with Ji Hyuk after they left. Hearing this, Kim Young becomes even angrier and accuses Chan-Soo of betrayal. Chan-Soo tries to calm him down, asking him to hear him out first and then decide. Chan-Soo begins by explaining that he asked Ji Hyuk to find a way to help them make a living, and Ji Hyuk agreed, promising to come up with a solution. He adds that there's definitely a way for everyone to work together, pointing out that even with his large number of summons, Ji Hyuk can't manage everything on his own. Kim Young asks what this plan is that Chan-Soo mentioned. Chan-Soo hesitates before responding, but Kim Young interrupts, saying he has already lost hope, and accuses him of asking them to believe in false promises. Kim Young questions how they can trust what Chan-Soo says. Chan-Soo replies that he can't share too many details now, but insists that Ji Hyuk isn't a bad person and that problems with him can be resolved through discussion. He then asks them to trust only him. The porters begin considering his words, and one of them remarks that Chan-Soo is worthy of their trust because he stood by him when he needed money. However, Kim Young yells at them, insisting that they need to protect their work themselves. In the end, Chan-Soo's friends decide to trust him and apologize for leaving him to follow Kim Young. Chan-Soo feels overjoyed and tells them they've made the right decision. Kim Young calls out to the porters before they leave, warning them that if they leave now and he succeeds in dealing with Ji Hyuk to restore things to normal, they will no longer have a place to work here. The scene shifts to Ji Hyuk, who has closed up shop for the day. He's walking with Saya, planning what to order from a restaurant because he's feeling hungry. Suddenly, someone calls out to them. The person turns out to be Kim Young. Ji Hyuk asks if he's one of the porters planning a protest against him. Kim Young looks shocked, assuming Chan-Soo told Ji Hyuk everything about their plans. Ji Hyuk laughs and asks why he thinks Chan-Soo is the one who revealed the plan. He then clarifies that all Chan-Soo did was make a simple request to work part-time with him, and Ji Hyuk agreed. Kim Young is stunned by this revelation, having had no idea about it. Ji Hyuk responds that it doesn't really concern him. Ji Hyuk then summons a magic circle and tells Kim Young that he initially intended to provoke him for a bit of fun, but now needs to finish this quickly since he's waiting for his food to arrive. Using his magic, Ji Hyuk summons magical chains to bind Kim Young. He notices others hiding nearby and calls out for them to come out. Ji Hyuk uses the chains to drag them all out of their hiding spots. Turning his attention to Kim Jung, Ji Hyuk remarks that by now, he should realize something is seriously wrong. Ji Hyuk approaches Kim Jung, stating that he didn't recognize him from afar, but now recalls that he's the one who caused trouble for Saya. He admits that he felt uneasy about leaving Kim Jung alone to avoid complications, but since Kim Jung came to him, he's decided to have some fun. Ji Hyuk's eyes glow red, and he smirks maliciously, saying that attempting to suppress someone working peacefully is unacceptable. He compares Kim Jung to a thug. Confused and overwhelmed, Kim Jung asks Ji Hyuk who he really is. Ji Hyuk slams him to the ground forcefully, declaring that this is what happens when someone tries to tarnish the reputation of a person who works peacefully without harming anyone. Continuing, Ji Hyuk speaks with a fiery gaze, pointing out that Kim Jung has crossed a line this time. He then summons his army of skeletons, informing Kim Jung that he will ensure he never dares to attempt such a thing again. Ji Hyuk tells him to prepare for what's about to happen as the skeletons begin to surround and restrain him. Ji Hyuk thinks to himself that he must overreact this time to make Kim Jung an example for anyone else who might try to harm him. The beating continues with a large number of skeletons, turning Kim Jung into a clear and unforgettable warning. Afterward, Ji Hyuk turns to Sia and tells her that he has avenged her. He adds that, being a generous person, he adjusted the appearances of those severely injured before letting them go, considering that this restores his honor fully. After Kim Jung and his group learn their lesson, Chan-Soo and the remaining porters who stayed with him approach Ji-hyuk to thank him. Ji-hyuk responds to them, saying that he needed people to help him with work anyway. Chan-Soo then asks what Ji-hyuk did with the other porters. Ji-hyuk smirks mischievously and replies that he only had a brief chat with them and reminded them not to try anything like that again. He then urges them to leave the past behind and focus on the important matter at hand. Ji-hyuk informs them that his offer is 25,000 won per hour. He clarifies one thing from the start: the work will never end in the future. Then, he opens his magic portal to reveal a massive skeleton with 6 legs, explaining that it's his latest design, a skeletal structure capable of carrying even humans inside it. He notes that this invention will make their work much easier than before. Chan-Soo and his friends are left speechless as they witness Ji-hyuk's new creation. The scene transitions to a group of awakened individuals. One of them tells his companions that he heard about skeletons transporting goods in a nearby city, and how incredibly efficient they are. Another responds that people are now visiting that city specifically to benefit from these skeletons. Curious, one of them expresses his eagerness to see these skeletons, doubting whether they will ever make it to their own city. He wonders aloud if he should travel to the other city to try them out. While talking, he hears someone calling out to him. Turning around, he sees a girl seated on a chair supported by skeletons. She informs them that her team, consisting of herself and 2 skeletons, offers their services at a rate of 120,000 won per hour. The awakened are stunned at the sight and ask her if they can rent just the skeletons without her. She apologizes, explaining that the skeletons can only be rented as part of a team. The 3 awakened discuss among themselves, with one questioning whether they should pay for the additional person. Another replies that the price isn't too high, and that they won't lose much by trying, adding that it would satisfy their curiosity. Ultimately, they decide to rent the skeletons from her. The girl is thrilled and assures them they won't regret their decision. She accompanies them into the dungeon, where they fight monsters together. While they wait for her to collect the corpses, she encourages them to keep moving instead of waiting. She explains that the skeletons can carry items while moving, eliminating the need for delays. One of the awakened is impressed, and admits that this idea is brilliant, as it saves time that would otherwise be wasted on collecting loot. A new monster appears, and the girl alerts them to its presence. She uses the skeletons as a shield to protect herself. The skeletons encase her, and the awakened comment on how ingenious the idea is, as it eliminates the need to worry about the porter's safety during battles. After the fight, the girl emerges from the skeleton and tells them she'll quickly gather the remaining corpses. One of the awakened asks what happened to the items collected earlier. She replies that everything was sorted during their fight with the monsters. He expresses his admiration for her efficiency, then mentions his desire to work with her again, and inquires about reserving the skeletons. She happily agrees, assuring him that it's no problem at all. The scene shifts to Ji-hyuk standing with Saya, commenting that the new skeleton team has started dominating the underground market for secondary monster products due to their high efficiency and affordable pricing. However, Ji-hyuk feels something is amiss despite their success. He recalls how people on the planet Saron reacted to his skeletons. Ji-hyuk remarks that he had been focused on increasing the number of porter skeletons alone. Since these skeletons weren't used in combat, everyone reacted positively to them. Yet, he wishes to produce massive numbers of skeletons to earn even more money. Still, he believes this would attract too much attention, potentially disrupting his peace and derailing his retirement plans. Ji-hyuk begins to think about how normal summoners can't summon more than 10 skeletons at once, yet he has far exceeded that limit. He considers that increasing the number further will undoubtedly draw attention. He wonders if he should simply give up instead of dealing with this headache. Looking at Saya, he notices her glued to her phone and finally feels like he understands what parents go through when their children become addicted to their devices. He takes the phone from her to see what she's been watching all this time. To his surprise, she's been watching idol videos. Frustrated, he remarks that he's under a lot of pressure while she's busy enjoying idol performances. He muses that these performances earn massive profits, but the problem lies in the loss of privacy that fame brings. All he wants is to make enough money to retire peacefully. As he continues to think about the topic, he realizes that even if he isn't famous, earning too much money inevitably attracts attention. Deciding that if he's going to attract attention anyway, it might as well be for something worthwhile, he immediately contacts Manager Park. Ji-hyuk informs him that he wants to increase the quantity of bones he's purchasing. Manager Park asks how much he needs, prompting Ji-hyuk to check the balance in his bank account. Ji-hyuk replies that he wants to purchase bones worth 32 million won. Manager Park is stunned by the large sum, but Ji-hyuk explains that he's reinvesting all his earnings into buying more bones and asks him to take care of it. Manager Park agrees, promising to procure the highest quality bones, and ends the call. Ji-hyuk feels relieved that the bone purchase is settled, and decides that Manager Park will handle such matters from now on. He begins planning for the future, and decides he'll need a company as a base of operations. He considers renting a large warehouse to serve as the company's headquarters, where he can mass-produce skeletons daily. However, a new idea strikes him, leading him to change his mind. He concludes that there's no need to produce skeletons daily when he can manufacture all of them in just one day. At the Gate Management Bureau, specifically in the Office of Awakened Registration, Director Young Sung-hoon asks if there's anything notable to report. A researcher replies that there's nothing special, but he mentions something that caught his attention. It's about a special management case involving Ji-hyuk, who creates transporter skeletons. Recent records show that Ji-hyuk produced 32 skeletons last month. Director Jung asks why this is being brought up now. The researcher explains that he heard Ji-hyuk recently started a company called Seiron, which is scheduled to open today. Impressed, Director Jung remarks that success depends on how a person utilizes their abilities. He adds that no one would have imagined using weak skeletons in such a clever way, and notes that Ji-hyuk must now have a substantial amount of money if he's starting a company. The researcher informs him that Ji-hyuk's monthly earnings could reach billions of Korean won. Given that his summoning rate has exceeded the limits, he suggests removing him from the special management list. Their discussion is interrupted when another researcher rushes in, asking Director Jung excitedly if he's heard the news. Director Jung assumes he's referring to the news about Ji-hyuk and his company, saying he just heard about it. The researcher clarifies that it's not about the transporter skeletons. It's about Ji-hyuk recently summoning a large number of transporters and deploying them randomly. Director Jung comments that this means the number 32 wasn't the maximum, and Ji-hyuk has likely set a new record. The first researcher adds that Ji-hyuk broke the record a month ago, as his previous summoning count had reached 27, which is astonishing. He proposes keeping Ji-hyuk under the special management list for monitoring. However, the second researcher objects vehemently, slamming the desk in frustration. The director asks about the number of skeletons Ji-hyuk summoned to cause such a commotion. The researcher replies that the count is not 30, nor even 62. He reveals that Ji-hyuk has summoned 300 skeletons, and that's just what they've been able to observe so far. Director Jung and the researchers immediately head to Ji-hyuk's company headquarters. Upon stepping out of the car, the director is stunned by the sight before him, hundreds of skeletons spread throughout the area. The researcher informs him that he has just completed surveying the site, and confirms that the number of skeletons has already surpassed 350. Director Jung asks where Ji-hyuk is, and the researcher responds that he is inside the warehouse. Upon entering the warehouse, the director discovers even more skeletons. Ji-hyuk notices the visitors and tells his workers to take a break, realizing it's also lunchtime. Addressing Director Kang, he suggests providing a lavish meal to celebrate their first task, and hands him his card. Ji-hyuk then turns to Director Jung, asking if he's from the management office, and introduces himself as Han Ji-hyuk. One of the researchers approaches and asks Ji-hyuk if he remembers him, reminding him that he conducted his evaluation test. Ji-hyuk responds that he does remember him. The researcher notices Saya standing next to Ji-hyuk and asks about her. Ji-hyuk explains that she's his cousin and has come to help with the work. The researcher greets Saya, then asks Ji-hyuk if all the skeletons present are actual summons. Ji-hyuk confirms this. The researcher informs him that their team has recorded over 350 skeletons. Ji-hyuk replies that this is likely accurate. The researcher questions whether Ji-hyuk lied during the evaluation test. Ji-hyuk firmly denies this, explaining that he never expected to summon such a large number. Director Jung intervenes, instructing Ji-hyuk to stop his activities immediately. He explains that summoning 100 skeletons is already impressive, but surpassing 350 exceeds natural and logical boundaries, noting that an F-class awakened shouldn't be capable of such feats. Confidently, Ji-hyuk asks why he should stop. Director Jung states that the issue is evident and considers the situation problematic. Ji-hyuk interrupts, asserting that it's not a problem for him. He points out that he consulted a lawyer while establishing his company to review all summoning-related laws. Ji-hyuk clarifies that the laws don't impose a limit on the number of summons. Director Jung counters by mentioning safety precautions. Ji-hyuk reassures him, emphasizing that these are the same skeletons he's been using before, without objections and questions why the matter is being raised now. Director Jung quietly asks the researcher if there's any issue with letting Ji-hyuk continue. The researcher responds that the laws never anticipated such large-scale summoning. Ji-hyuk cuts in, stating that his company was established legally and lawfully. He references the special law allowing the rental of abilities for profit, adding that safety is not a concern since those who use the skeletons can vouch for their reliability. Therefore, there's no problem. In the end, the registration office staff are unable to take any action against Ji-hyuk and leave the premises, having witnessed the massive scale of his summoning. They couldn't argue with him due to his meticulous preparations and well-crafted responses to all their concerns. Turning to Saya, Ji-hyuk confidently declares that his decision to launch everything at once was the right one. He adds that if he had summoned the skeletons gradually each day, they would have found excuses and loopholes to hinder him. However, overwhelming people with something beyond their comprehension leaves them paralyzed and unable to act. Ji-hyuk ponders whether he should continue this approach, suggesting the possibility of summoning 300 skeletons daily. He considers that if he were to stockpile 2,000 skeletons and release them all at once, no one could challenge him. Excited by the idea, he declares that he's ready to start immediately. However, fatigue sets in, and he loses the motivation to work, even though he successfully created 1,000 transporter skeletons. The media and newspapers were abuzz with reports about an awakened individual controlling over 500 summons. However, Ji-hyuk was unconcerned, as his focus lay elsewhere, on his lack of motivation to work. He admitted that he had been extremely excited about starting his company, but summoning 300 skeletons daily was no easy task. He sarcastically commented that he wanted to retire to stop working, yet now he had to work harder to achieve retirement. While he was lost in complaints and boredom, the sound of a knock on the door interrupted him. Manager Kang entered in a flustered state. Kang informed him of a major problem happening outside. Ji-hyuk asked about the issue, and Kang explained that a large number of porters from other regions were staging a protest outside the company. Shocked at the mention of protests, Ji-hyuk told Kang to move quickly. The demonstration was caused by the skeletal transporters, which had led to significant losses for human porters. Awakened individuals found the skeletons a more cost-effective and efficient option, rendering human porters unnecessary. The porters felt that their opportunities were already limited by automation, but the summons had completely destroyed their livelihood, forcing them to travel to distant gates for work. They accused Seron of stealing their jobs by employing skeletal transporters and demanded that CEO Han Ji-hyuk protect their rights. Appearing before the protesters, Ji-hyuk addressed them respectfully, assuring them that he understood their concerns and invited them to come inside for a calm discussion. Inside the meeting room, Ji-hyuk acknowledged that their protest was about job-related issues and asked them to present their grievances. The leader of the protest stated that the porters were struggling due to the overwhelming presence of skeletal transporters in the market. He added that many had to work in remote locations because of decreased local demand. Even when they found work, their value was diminished compared to the cost efficiency of the skeletons. Taking his time to process this, Ji-hyuk calculated that one skeleton could replace 6 human porters. With 250 skeletons in the market, that equated to replacing 1,500 people. If he released the 1,000 skeletons he was planning, more than 3,000 jobs would be lost. Realizing the potential consequences of his goals, Ji-hyuk decided not to increase the number of skeletal transporters in the market. He didn't want his work to threaten the livelihoods of others. He also proposed adjusting the pricing of skeletal teams to align more closely with market rates, asking the protesters if this solution was acceptable. The protesters agreed that the arrangement was very fair. Ji-hyuk requested that the agreement be documented and formalized. He asked manager Kang to bring papers and pens, and Kang eagerly complied, thrilled that the matter had been resolved smoothly and peacefully. Kang looked at Ji-hyuk with admiration, seeing him as a remarkable leader capable of handling crises without causing harm to anyone. Having mitigated the scale of the skeletal transporter project, Ji-hyuk began contemplating new ways to earn money. He sought a new product that could be easily produced, unrelated to combat like the skeletons, and one that wouldn't threaten existing jobs. Recalling Kang's description of him as a considerate and respectful leader, Ji-hyuk felt frustrated by his seemingly endless bad luck. While jotting down ideas and specifications for the new product, something caught his attention, sparking a new train of thought. He noticed the pen he was writing with bore the label, "Made in China." Inspecting his notebook, he found the same phrase printed on it. Even his coffee mug carried the same label. An idea suddenly struck him like a bolt of lightning. Why not produce items currently imported from abroad? This would eliminate concerns about competition from other countries. A few days later, at a nearby shoe factory close to Saran Company, Director Kim Daok-bae was reflecting on the factory's history, passed down through generations. However, he admitted that he was facing tough times competing with China's low prices and was worried about managing labor costs. As he pondered over a critical decision, his secretary rushed in, asking if he had heard about the skeletons and Saran Company in the industrial complex. Director Kim responded that he had heard about the company and expressed envy that they could use their abilities to turn a profit, wishing he had awakened a power to change his life as well. A voice interrupted him, disagreeing with the notion that they were simply lucky. The visitor turned out to be Ji-hyuk, who introduced himself and expressed his pleasure in meeting Director Kim. Ji-hyuk stated that he had recently taken an interest in the factory and wanted to learn more about its operations, as he was considering acquiring it. Director Kim was shocked by Ji-hyuk's statement, but saw it as a golden opportunity. He readily agreed and offered to give Ji-hyuk a tour of the factory to explain everything. Starting with a walkthrough, Director Kim explained the processes, expressing his desire to sell the factory for the benefit of the workers. He detailed how the first step involved using the machines in the back to cut the individual parts of the shoes. Next, those parts were sewn together using the machines available there. Ji-hyuk commented that the machines seemed a bit outdated. Director Kim, slightly embarrassed, assured him that the workers were highly skilled and could compensate for the machine's shortcomings, noting that this was better than relying on faulty modern machinery. Ji-hyuk acknowledged his point and asked him to continue. Director Kim explained that after the workers finished manufacturing the shoes, all the parts were assembled and stitched together in one place. He clarified that while the process seemed simple, it became more complex when delving into finer details. Ji-hyuk turned to Saya and remarked that the work seemed manageable and much easier than producing combat equipment. He then asked Director Kim whether all the work was manual or if there were automated machines involved. Director Kim replied that the cutting process could be automated, but everything else was done entirely by hand. He added that he was slightly worried about the ratio of workers to production, explaining that if Ji-hyuk wanted to run the factory at full capacity, he would need to hire more workers. Currently, they had 20 workers, but at one point, the number had been as high as 100. Ji-hyuk commented that 100 workers seemed like a reasonable number and asked how the sales were managed. Director Kim explained that most of their work depended on client orders, where the factory adjusted its basic designs to meet specific needs. Ji-hyuk inquired whether they could produce inventory in advance and sell it later. Director Kim replied that it was possible, but warned that unsold stock could lead to losses. He added that demand for small shoe factories like theirs was hard to predict. Ji-hyuk chuckled, saying that Director Kim was refreshingly honest. Director Kim laughed back, stating that there was nothing to hide. Ji-hyuk then asked if they could produce large quantities of low-cost shoes for export using low-cost labor. Director Kim responded that it wasn't so simple, explaining that major brands sought countries with low-cost labor for a reason, instead of fully automating their operations. Ji-hyuk clarified that his question might have been misunderstood and asked for a straightforward answer. Would the idea work or not? Director Kim replied that it likely would, as cheap products always found a market. Satisfied with the answer, Ji-hyuk told Director Kim he would buy the factory immediately. He prepared the necessary paperwork and asked if the factory was now officially his. Director Kim reviewed the documents and was deeply moved when he saw that Ji-hyuk had kept him on as the factory's director and retained all the existing employees. He thanked Ji-hyuk profusely, promising to do his utmost to secure orders and find new clients, and assured Ji-hyuk that he would repay his kindness one day. Ji-hyuk tells Director Kim that there's no need for so much gratitude, as he already plans to build up inventory and sell it directly through exports. He then uses his summoning ability to call forth skeletons and introduces them to Director Kim as the factory's new employees. He asks Director Kim to teach them the details of the work, assuring him that they will follow orders without hesitation. Touched, Director Kim describes Ji-hyuk as an angel rather than a human. The skeletons immediately begin working as soon as Director Kim issues the required commands. Director Kim remarks that the factory hasn't been this lively in a long time and credits the revival to the new CEO. Ji-hyuk responds modestly, saying there's no need for such praise since it's Director Kim who resolved all the issues. Director Kim admits that he was initially surprised and never expected skeletons to be employed in the factory. He asks Ji-hyuk if this is even legal. Ji-hyuk assures him that they are not breaking any laws. He then shifts the focus, suggesting they examine the shoes being produced and evaluate their quality. Director Kim inspects the shoe and admits it's better than he expected, although not on par with handmade craftsmanship. Ji-hyuk asks Director Kim to stop giving vague answers and point out exactly what the problem is and what needs to be corrected. Director Kim highlights that the stitching is weak and contains gaps. Ji-hyuk promptly addresses the issue, giving new instructions to the skeletons. Afterward, a new shoe is produced, and Ji-hyuk presents it to Director Kim for evaluation. Director Kim confirms that the flaws he pointed out have been fully resolved. Ji-hyuk expresses his satisfaction, remarking that if they keep learning from their mistakes and improving, the shoes will become easily marketable. More importantly, the skeletons don't require labor costs, allowing for significant savings in production expenses. Director Kim agrees, emphasizing that eliminating labor costs is a major achievement, enabling them to compete with Chinese products in price and even in export markets. He adds that if they continue building their reputation, they might secure OEM, original equipment manufacturer, contracts from major brands. Surprised, Ji-hyuk asks about these contracts, assuming that big brands manufacture their own products. Director Kim explains that brands typically focus on design, while factories like theirs handle production and delivery. Ji-hyuk is astonished, realizing that they don't need to design anything new, they just need to focus on manufacturing. As time passes, Saran Shoe Factory buzzes with continuous activity, handling increasing orders. They even acquire a few other shoe factories to expand operations, keeping Ji-hyuk busy around the clock. At the end of another exhausting workday, Ji-hyuk returns home late to rest. However, he receives a call from Director Kim, who apologizes for the late hour, but informs him of a new order requiring adjustments to the production lines. Tired, Ji-hyuk assures Director Kim that he'll return to the factory immediately. Director Kim feels embarrassed for reporting the adjustments after they had nearly completed the previous order. Ji-hyuk realizes that the increasing workload is not only affecting the business, but also the team. He considers training Sia to help out, but he acknowledges that they don't have the time or energy to train a new person, as it would demand significant effort. Increasing the number of skeletons isn't an easy option either. Finding new corpses has become difficult, and increasing the numbers might risk exposure. If people discovered that he's using skeletons, it could damage his social standing. He still needs to refine the basic framework and prepare the required work units. While contemplating the matter, Ji-hyuk comes up with an entirely new idea. A few days later, the factory hosts a day dedicated to interviewing new employees, including Baek Sang-ho. Ji-hyuk asks Sang-ho to sit down and begins reviewing his resume. Ji-hyuk notices that Sang-ho has little experience apart from part-time jobs and asks if he has any special skills. Sang-ho feels nervous, realizing he doesn't have any standout skills, and hesitates, unsure if the required skills should be related to the job. After observing Sang-ho's prolonged silence, Ji-hyuk reassures him that it's not a big deal. Suddenly, Sang-ho blurts out that he does have a special skill. When Ji-hyuk asks what it is, Sang-ho responds hesitantly that he's good at games. Embarrassed, Sang-ho feels foolish for mentioning it and wonders why he even said that. Ji-hyuk asks what makes him skilled at games, and Sang-ho reluctantly explains, saying he plays all kinds of games and effortlessly reaches top rankings. However, he internally thinks it might be better to stop talking to avoid rambling. Ji-hyuk inquires whether he enjoys simulation and building games, and Sang-ho confirms that those are indeed his favorite types. Ji-hyuk asks if Sang-ho has anything to showcase his skills. Sang-ho mentions that he has some videos he can share. He opens one video, explaining that the game involves assembling golem parts, but he created a flying machine using those parts and made it functional. Sang-ho elaborates that the game's physics engine is highly advanced. He points to a motor beneath a fan-like structure, which is originally a golem's arm piece but has excellent thrust power. He explains that the design required creativity, as it involved repurposing parts for entirely different functionalities to build a mechanical device. Feeling unsure about the interview, Sang-ho considers looking for another company. However, Ji-hyuk surprises him by enthusiastically announcing that he's hired on the spot. Ji-hyuk asks if Sang-ho can start the next day. Overjoyed, Sang-ho confirms and thanks Ji-hyuk for the incredible opportunity. On his first day, things don't look promising at first. The issue lies with a skeletal structure on the desk, which Sang-ho struggles to understand. Ji-hyuk explains that the skeletal structure is, in essence, like a computer he doesn't need. Shocked and unconvinced, Sang-ho listens as Ji-hyuk clarifies that the structure is actually a control unit. Ji-hyuk begins demonstrating the skeletal framework on the desk, explaining that moving the lever causes the skeleton to move correspondingly. He assures Sang-ho that he'll teach him how to operate it, and afterward, Sang-ho can program a gymnastics routine for the skeleton. The deadline for the task is 1 week. Despite his confusion, Sang-ho agrees to the challenge. The control unit given to Sang-ho looks like an ordinary controller, but is actually a skeleton of a deceased mage. Unlike regular skeletons, skeletal mages can use basic magic. The device is designed as a controller with buttons and levers for operation. The controls are somewhat tricky as the unit was hastily assembled. However, Ji-hyuk is astonished when Sang-ho completes the task 2 days ahead of the deadline, proving that he was the right choice. Ji-hyuk asks for Sang-ho's feedback on using the device, which is still in its experimental phase, and requests that he point out any flaws or difficulties. Excited, Sang-ho enthusiastically lists various flaws and suggests improvements, but Ji-hyuk has to cut him off, promising to address those issues later. Ji-hyuk explains that he expects great things from Sang-ho, especially as the company's first programmer. He informs Sang-ho that when new members join, Sang-ho will be their manager, so he must work hard to prepare for training them. Deeply moved, Sang-ho thanks Ji-hyuk sincerely. Ji-hyuk responds by informing him that he's already been promoted and will receive a salary increase accordingly. Overcome with excitement, Sang-ho promises to work diligently to meet Ji-hyuk's expectations. So emotional that he's almost in tears, Sang-ho is reassured by Ji-hyuk, who says that everyone needs to give their best effort. Internally, though, Ji-hyuk still struggles to understand the younger generation's exaggerated reactions.